Depth 4s only grow higher in difficulty, with the 5s being the most challenging dungeons, yet yielding the best rewards and loot. Depth 5s are where you get the best blood gems and runes from, by the way, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, let's quickly talk about the inside of the chalices and what the layouts of them actually are. What do they look like? Fortunately for you, we have a visual aid for that too. As you can see by this picture, chalices have a rather simplistic foundation. Their interior designs will vary, but the foundations will not. What is certain is that nearly every chalice after the first Pthumeru chalice you get will follow this structure. There is a lamp, a gate, and a boss, first and foremost. Then there's a pre-lamp side path, a huge sprawling main area where you have to go find a lever to open the said gate, and then an additional pre-boss side path before you go and fight the Layers boss. Now, you can skip the side paths and just head to the lever and the gate to fight the boss, but it is in the side paths and in the sprawling main area where you find various loot such as ritual materials, upgrade materials, new weapons, new armor sets, or even new blood gems. And that's all before you fight the boss. The bosses themselves can drop chalices for you to create, or even drop you the best blood gems in the game. Once you beat the said boss, though, you then descend one layer further into the chalice, and the layout repeats until you run out of layers. If you understand this map, then nearly all of the chalice interiors will start to make much more sense. They'll attempt to confuse you with various new hallways, roundabouts, and hidden shortcuts, but this map still remains relevant through it all. Another thing to note, nearly all chalices will have at least 3 layers in total for you to get through. A few might have 4 layers, but that's the maximum. But now, let's pause a bit. Say you beat the second layer of your first Pthumeru chalice. You get a Pthumeru root chalice as a reward from that second boss. Now the question is, how does this root chalice differ from the normal chalice that you already have? It goes something like this. If a chalice has root in its name, it means that when you make this chalice, that the layout will never be the same. Root chalices give you the randomly generated dungeons of this game. If a chalice doesn't have root in the name, then they are fixed, meaning that the layouts, layers, and bosses will be the same no matter how many times you make it or which player makes it. This is how players are able to co-op through the fixed chalice dungeons rather easily. Players can make the same chalice and progress through them at the same time. Now the question becomes, if the root chalices are always different, how do players manage to co-op and invade each other in them? And this is where the glyph codes and the makeshift altar come in. Say that you and a friend want to go through a randomly generated root chalice. Only one of you has to make one through the chalice ritual option. Then the other player can join in by typing in the glyph code that spawns when a chalice ritual is made. Now mind you, both of you do have to have the same root chalice though. Be sure of that. But before you go typing in glyph codes, the maker of the root chalice has to share their glyph first. Chalice makers have 2 options when sharing their glyph. They can either make it closed or open. Closed means that only players who know the glyph code can enter into the chalice for co-op or invasions. This option right here. Open means that not only can anyone enter through the use of the glyph code here, they can go all the way over to the makeshift altar and use its quick search feature for either cooperation or invasions. Side note, you can only access the makeshift altar through the use of a short ritual root chalice. And you can only buy this from the upper Bath Messengers in the Hunter's Dream, right after you beat the 3rd boss in the first chalice you got from the Bloodstark Beast. That's right, the first Pthumeru chalice you got. So, that set of sentences was a bit of a mouthful, so let me just repeat it again, but slower. Play all the way through the first chalice you get after beating the first Bloodstark Beast. Once you beat the 3rd boss, which is this big fire doggo, go up to the side of the workshop and you can buy the short root chalice. Take this back to the makeshift altar and quick search away for no material cost at all. It does cost you 10 insight to buy, which you ought to have after coming out of the chalice at this point, and is well worth the purchase. However, going ahead, I do need to tell you about this. Quick searching from the makeshift altar has a few caveats. Not everyone opens their root chalices these days, so activity might be slow or deadlocked even. What might make activity even slower than that is the fact that when you do connect to somebody, the game has to generate the chalice on that altar and then connect you into the world before you can even join. This process might take a few minutes or so if you're trying to get into a specific player's world. And in that case, I would recommend that if you want to join a specific player, consider going to one of the 6 tombstones and use the glyph search option instead. By doing this, you put in the glyph code that you know, go into said dungeon, go to the layer that they are currently on, and ring either your blue bell or your red bell in person. The short route search is still a rather convenient tool in some cases, but don't expect it to work all the time. This is Bloodborne matchmaking we're talking about after all. All this leaves is the second option, back at the tombstone menu, which is the Chalice Dungeon Search. This option allows you to randomly generate any player-created dungeon under certain parameters of your choosing. This is of course accounting for the fact that you yourself have made a chalice similar to what you're looking for. So you can't just go looking for something like a Depth 5 chalice right off the bat when you only made a Depth 1 chalice in the past. Also, you have to consider that you're trying to find chalices that were made open and not closed. This option should be used for those people who are just looking for variety in their life. It's a rather neat idea and it doesn't cost you any materials to make. Moving on, let's now talk about the 4 types of chalices that there are in the game. And when I talk about types, I mean the Sumeru Loran is an institute type chalices. The Sumeru chalice you have is a part of a set of chalices known as Sumeru. Get it? As you progress further in the base game, you'll find other later bosses that will drop you a Loran or his chalice. You do get an intertune while you're rummaging around in the other chalices, but I'll just say now that the intertune isn't particularly worthy of note, nor is it all that important for the purposes of this video. It does have loot that the other chalices don't have, such as a unique armor set and unique enemies to fight, but otherwise, they're not too exciting. The main takeaway you should get from knowing the 4 types of chalices is that each chalice has their own unique design, enemies, and most importantly, unique blood drops. Sumeru will give you radial blood gems to fit in the radial slots of your weapon. The Loran will give you waning gems, and the Iz will give you triangles. And the Intertomb is also here. Furthermore, it's important to note that the different types of chalices will add their own effects onto the gems you farm. Sumeru will primarily give you physical damage gems, such as Tempering or Adept. Loran will give you fire, bolt, and poison blood gems along with physical gems. And lastly, his chalices will start to add arcane to the potential drops you might receive. And believe me, it gets more complicated from here if we want to talk about all the blood gem drop tables and the socio-economic implications of rising gem inflation, but for now, I'll save you the overwhelming insight gained to move on to another topic instead, but one that is all the more relevant. Speaking of, you'll be happy to hear that we're on the home stretch of this entire video. Take some extra sips of water, stretch yourself out a bit, because all we need to talk about now are the final variations of chalices that you never need to worry about in Bloodborne. The Cursed Chalices and the Sinister Chalices. Cursed Chalices. Some call them FRC or CRF Chalices, but the cool kids call them FRC. This is because they have certain rights, or modifiers, that get added to the chalices that you create. The FRC stands for these rights. The F stands for Fetid, R for Rotted, and C for Cursed. The Fetid right strengthens certain enemies, giving them a visible red aura. The Rotted right lets new enemies appear, ones that you may have never seen before in the entire game. What are they exactly? Oh, would you like to know? Oh, I don't know either. Lastly, the Cursed right cuts your health down by half. Think Halo Legendary, all scopes on. Yeah, that good stuff right there. It's in these chalices where you obtain the best of the best blood gems. All of the glyph codes that you see on all the spreadsheets floating around all of the internet are transfixed around these cursed chalices. They may sound intimidating at first, but with a little knowledge and a decent amount of courage, you too can reap good loot, if the RNG is in your favor, of course. Last but most certainly not least, there's the Sinister Chalices. Similar to the Cursed Chalices, the Sinister Chalices have a rite modifier of their own. If you activate the Sinister Rite on these chalices, they will spawn a bell-ringing woman on all of their layers instantly as you come into the world. What's more, if you ring your Sinister Bell while inside of the Sinister Chalice, another bell-ringing woman will spawn right alongside the first. Tutorials is going to describe the more obscure mechanics in Bloodborne, such as the blood gems, Carol runes, and the ever-so-infamous Chalice dungeons. This video isn't necessarily meant for fresh players, and I mean fresh out of the oven players. If you don't understand the basics of Bloodborne, as in its combat, how to level up, or even the UI, I'll encourage you to check out the Beginner's Guide video from VatiVidya, who I think does a succinct job at giving players a good enough foundation to pick up a controller and play a game like Bloodborne for the first time. Otherwise, if you think you're someone who has a bit of a grip on Bloodborne, or you're a bit of a nerd, then buckle up.